Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Global Justice in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. Today we have a wonderful speaker, Joan Roelofs, who's going to talk about why the peace movement is so slow at getting going this time, how far the Defense Department money penetrates into all of US society and of course around the world, into NGOs, think tanks, publishers, as well as obviously the weapons manufacturers. I hope you all know that there's going to be in November, Noam Chomsky and other people are sponsoring a tribunal against the, what is it called? The weapons manufacturers. I forget exactly what the group is called. So that'll be interesting. The Center for Global Justice is a bilingual international research center working to make a better world and to support the solidarity economy. You can go to our webpage to look at all of the programs that we have and to look at any of our past videos, because we have those all archived on our website. And of course, Joan's talk will be there later on this afternoon. I'm Betsy Bowman. I forget if I said that. One of the co-founders of the center suddenly died 2 weeks ago, so we're all a little bit slightly in shock. I also wanted to mention that William Hartung has an excellent article. Can you see it? Yeah, here we go. The Pentagon's Budget from Hell on Tom Dispatch. He's a great commentator on the defense budget, and that's well worth reading. He comments that for every 11,200 jobs, the Pentagon spends $1 billion. So if it costs the Pentagon $1 billion to provide 11,200 jobs. Now I wonder how many teachers and nurses could be hired with $1 billion. I bet it's a lot more than 11,200. And I hope Joan can tell us. Joan has already written 2 books, which she'll tell us about, one of which was on the philanthropic community in the United States and how corporate money gets into all of these so-called philanthropic organizations and the corrupting or co-opting influence of them. Of course, the Defense Department money is also a co-opting influence, but I'll stop there. Next week, what are we going to do?
Next week, we're going to rerun the Cliff Bob report on their experiences in the civil rights movement.
Okay, so next week we will rerun a program on the civil rights movement that took place on January 30th with Cliff Duran, who just passed away, as I mentioned, and Bob Stone. Bob Stone and I and Cliff Duran founded the Center for Global Justice 20 years ago. I didn't think our 20th anniversary would be memorial for one of the founders, but it is. Anyway, I'll let Joan talk now. So, Joan, please.
Thank you, Betsy. And I wanted to say that I had been to the Center for Global Justice in 2004, the first year, and I've spent a few winters down in San Miguel and spoken at the center, and I'm very happy for the work you've done and also the fantastic hospitality when I was down there.
We have birthday parties for Joan.
Yes, that's right. My famous birthday parties. Yes, and I'm happy to be in the Quinta Loreto again, because that was a wonderful place too. Too bad Via Organica isn't there, though. Yeah. So my recent book is The $1 Trillion Silencer, and the information about it will be in the chat, or you can just Google it and you will find it's published by Clarity Press, which is, by the way, a great publisher. They have a wonderful list of really important books that don't get published elsewhere. So in this, my recent book, I start out with a question, which is, why is there so little anti-war protest, especially among progressive people, civil rights activists, academics, religious leaders, environmentalists, artists, and educated people in general? I never said there's no anti-war activism, because there is some, and it's quite noble. The Veterans for Peace, Code Pink, World Beyond War. I'm affiliated with some of those, and also the War Industry Resistors Network. But there are plenty of them. The International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons is a wonderful group, international group too. So there's some, but it's very, very little. And there's very little visibility of militarism and the militarization of the country, which is quite amazing. The mainstream press says very little about. In my city, there's plenty of military industries, but you never read about it in the local newspaper. And I've been silenced myself, I think, on this recent book, although 2 other books, I had profiles in the local paper and interviews and articles, but they don't want to talk about this one. So it isn't just the war and the military operations that people don't seem to be very concerned about, although they're horrendous. But it's also the gradual militarization of our society and the environmental and health hazards resulting just from war preparation, even if there aren't wars going on. And then there is the threat of nuclear annihilation, and that isn't a small matter. People are protesting about many other things. I think this is a serious enough thing to create some protest. And it also amazes me that there are so many scientists who think that nuclear war is a reasonable option. How can scientists be so dumb? I actually reviewed a book called From Mad to Madness about Diana Johnstone's father. She wrote his autobiography, she published his autobiography after his death. He was actually one of the scientists inside the government, and he also noted that they were mad, but he wasn't able to publish this information in his life. He didn't feel comfortable publishing it in his lifetime, but he was dealing with the best brains in the country, and they were calculating how many factories would be destroyed in other countries, and that was the main issue about data on nuclear war. Anyway, it's gotten much worse. The bombs are more powerful. Every branch of the military has its own nuclear armaments. It's incredible, and yet people don't seem as concerned about that as they do about many other issues, which I would consider less significant. And it is true that there are many people who have to just keep busy all day just to survive themselves. I understand that, but I expect people who have time to do other kinds of protests, climate protests, or other issues, abortion rights, maybe would have a little time to deal with the fate of human civilization, so-called civilization. And I do want to say that in my book, I emphasize those aspects of the military-industrial complex that are rarely discussed. I know the work of Bill Hartung and many people who write wonderfully about the weapons makers and their role in Congress and the lobbying and the campaign contributions and the hungry for profits. But I wanted to look at some other sides of this problem. And the reason was because I want people to figure out how it can be changed. And I also have to say that militarization goes on throughout the entire world. So much of the world is militarized. I'm very interested in the network that NATO has, not just their activities, but the whole bureaucracy of NATO and how it has its claws into universities, think tanks, all kinds of other programs, environmental programs, NATO, environmental organization, you know. And that interests me a lot, but I don't have time to cover the whole world. So I'm talking mostly about the United States. I will refer to a few external activities. And really, it's, again, I wrote this because I want other people, journalists, activists, scholars, to look into this area. I found so much information, and there's so much more that can be discovered. I've made a map of my state, New Hampshire, an interactive map that shows many of the different aspects of militarism in this state alone. And it's quite overwhelming. I was going to show it, but I decided not to. But if you could email me if you want to me to send you the link. So I felt I can't save the world, but I might try to make the picture a little more visible. And my theme is that it isn't just bribery that accounts for the size of the military budget. It props up a declining economy, and that leads to prosperity in some areas, survival and subsistence in others, but there are still a lot of economically devastated areas of the United States. It's quite shocking, not just in the homeless encampments in all the major cities, but rural areas too are impoverished in so many ways, with so many unemployed people, the lack of shops and grocery stores anymore, only dollar stores. Jeff St. Clair has written a wonderful article about his return to his hometown in Indiana and seen the devastation there, that so many unemployed people. And of course, there's also so many unhappy children and teenagers, teenage suicide, and drug addiction. It's just incredible, and depression. So the military, in its demented way, actually tries to save bits of capitalism here and there. And I'm going to show you a map of the United States that the Small Business Administration considers economically disadvantaged areas. And this is where they encourage and help businesses to locate. Let's see if I can, yes, this is, these are called hub zones. All the colored areas are areas that are considered, at least by the Small Business Administration, to be economically disadvantaged. Please remember, this is the richest country in the world. Okay. Oops. Somehow I'm not there anymore. And of course, it isn't just the military budget that stimulates the economy. I don't want to imply that. Government spending for healthcare, education, social security, infrastructure, agriculture, prisons, environmental remediation, and so much else is also a part of this attempt to stimulate the economy. We don't often see it isn't part of the discretionary budget, but social security, healthcare, these are enormous expenditures by governmental expenditures, through whether through taxation or otherwise. So to talk about a free enterprise economy really leaves a lot out. And I won't even talk about the economic importance in our country of drugs and pornography and gambling and that sort of thing. Very extremely important in many areas of the country. Keeps the economy going. Drugs provide money in very poor areas, drug dealers, so that there can be grocery stores and some people can pay rent. But in the manufacturing sector of our society, military spending is crucial because of outsourcing, because of automation, and even changes in consumer taste. So the US has a covert industrial policy that puts military priorities ahead of human needs. People have figured out that we should convert civilian military industry to civilian industry, but I don't know how that can happen. I don't know how politically it can happen. So I looked around for some examples of what is causing the silence. And first of all, there's a very obvious one, and that's the support from the military establishment itself. And it tends to be underestimated because people say there's so few people in the uniformed services now, and they're more likely to be killed by suicide than by enemy fire, which is true. But it is also the case that there are plenty of people who are not only in the uniformed forces, but their families and also their relatives. And this is very important because people who have had a grandfather who was a war hero, or who have a granddaughter who is now a specialist in the Navy, are unlikely to criticize military operations. And there are just a lot of people who say, well, they were part of a military family, they're so-and-so is a war hero. And there's a lot of silence. I see this all the time. The military people will do protests. They will protest the pollution on military bases, and also the inadequate care for returning veterans, things like that. You will find military families protesting, but they don't focus on the goals of the military itself, on the military operations overseas, whether they are overt wars or covert operations or assassinations or whatever, or even the environmental damage that is caused by preparation for war overseas, the devastation of countries. You don't hear much about that. Also, the Department of Defense itself is the largest department in the federal government, with many civilian employees. This works very closely with other departments, such as Energy, which is responsible for nuclear weapons production. The State Department provides training for all weapons that go along with all weapons sales to foreign militaries. Homeland Security operates with values and methods similar to that of Defense Department. And even the Department of Agriculture gets into the act because it worked with the Department of Defense to attempt to create a dairy industry in Afghanistan. And of course, the Department of Defense also collaborates with agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Institutes of Health, and the Agency for International Development. The Department of Veterans Affairs is another major establishment, and that works closely with the entire healthcare industry of the United States, both profit and nonprofit. All government employment, federal and state, gives preference to veterans, so they're very well represented everywhere in the government, and very few are inclined to criticize our military operations. The Defense Department also includes institutes, academies, and university-based programs in the United States and overseas. And the students and instructors in these programs are not only military people, but also politicians and other civilians. Now, we can think of the School of the Americas, which has now changed its name, but it still exists in Fort Benning, Georgia, which trained the militaries all over Latin America. But we have training all over Europe in institutes, and people from all over the world participate in these. There is now a funded program that's aimed especially at colleges that serve low-income and minority students. This provides for a major in military intelligence. It's called the Intelligence Community Centers for Academic Excellence. And it's found even at the City College of New York, which was once a hotbed of socialist disputation. Most universities and colleges have reserve officer training corps. In our public schools, there are the Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, and some public schools are military academies. Chicago has several of these. They are well funded by the Department of Defense, and parents can choose to send their children to them. Washington State has a military department. It sponsors high schools for at-risk youth, and other states have similar ones, and it calls these academies quasi-military. Again, with funding and support from the Department of Defense. California has quite a few of these academies also. The millions that are spent on recruitment of high school students also include adventure vans that enable children to have fun simulating warfare. And I have a picture of these that I can show you. Adventure vans that come to the schools, and the children could go in and play war games and get all excited about this. Of course, they have also computer war games that are put out by private companies, but even those companies work with the military to get their licenses. They sometimes get training videos from the military that they convert into children's games. So the younger generation is different from the older generation. I think increasingly the younger generation is being militarized. And the Department of Defense also has an office that assists in the production of Hollywood films. Another influence, of course, on society in general, but also all kinds of employment is furthered that way. Amazing, all the different agencies within the Department of Defense itself. They have one agency where you can apply to have a flyover your parade. And if your purpose is approved by the Department of Defense, you can have warplanes fly over your parade. There's a whole office for that purpose. Okay. Military bases are the economic hubs of their regions. In addition to about 800 bases in foreign countries, there are hundreds in the United States and its territories. And some of these bases are the size of small cities. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, is the largest base in the world. The businesses and communities around the bases provide food, entertainment, housing, shopping, museums, car rentals, and so forth. Camp followers are legion. Every kind of activity now, not just one kind of activity for camp followers. On the bases themselves, housing and food is often contracted out, so that this is another source of profit for local and national businesses. Anthropologist CATHARINE Lutz has written a wonderful book about Fort Bragg called Home Front. And she's very critical of militarization of life. And that's what she talks about in this book, the effect of a military base on Fayetteville, North Carolina. Bases also mean huge contracts for construction companies like Bechtel. They are getting contracts as large as the ones for weapons makers. And this is for construction all over the world, as well as in the United States. Information technology installation, also huge contracts for this. Facilities upgrading, constantly upgrading the bases and the facilities. Environmental remediation is a huge business in this country. Guard duty and more. And of course, civilian workers find lots of jobs in these areas. And the Defense Department spends billions for intelligence and logistics and transportation. Despite the fact that there are many in-house intelligence agencies, a lot of it is outsourced. As Edward Snowden tells his story. The US military is the largest consumer of fuel in the world. And Humana, which is a private health insurance company, was among the top 10 defense contractors in 2020, along with Lockheed and Boeing and BAE and General Dynamics. Humana was right in there. It's a private health insurance company. So every kind of business, every size of business gets a contract, which helps our outsourced economy to plod along. In my city, a manufacturer of wooden children's furniture received a contract to make cribs for Army-based childcare centers because new safety standards required the replacement of the existing cribs. Now, there is beautiful wooden furniture being made in this country, but it is incredibly expensive. And most childcare centers would usually either buy overseas furniture or secondhand furniture or maybe plastic furniture. But the federal government requires that federal departments buy new USA-made products unless they are not available at all. And this gives many declining industries that are threatened by outsourcing a new lease on life. Even sports bras for the military, unlike almost all other bras, are made in the United States. The Defense Department also has major contracts with many non-governmental organizations. And this is very rarely, I don't know anyone else who publicizes this in general. And that includes environmental and charitable organizations. One of the Defense Department programs, the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration, creates buffer zones around bombing ranges. It aims to reduce civilian encroachment on live fire exercises and bombing ranges and war games. And the Nature Conservancy is a major contractor in this program, and also involved are Evergreen State College, Ducks Unlimited, Oregon Zoo, Maine Audubon Society, Trout Unlimited, all Defense Department contractors for this program because of the great fear that civilian activities will encroach. So buffer zones are created around bombing ranges, and environmental endangered species are relocated there so they won't be too close to the bombing. And this is a very important program. The Student Conservation Association also helps to protect endangered species that are on military bases. So many organizations are getting money from that military budget. Goodwill Industries is also a major contractor, along with Lighthouse for the Blind and other employers of disabled people. And they provide janitorial services, furniture, clothing, landscaping, again, providing employment for people who are often considered difficult to employ. Then, of course, the Defense Department funds a lot of university programs, research institutes, think tanks, even though it has a huge number of in-house scientists, researchers, and policy experts. And it contracts for a surprising amount of biotechnology research, not just in the United States, but also abroad in many, many different countries throughout the world. And in my book, I have a lot of illustrations, and I have a map of some of these programs throughout the world. And a lot of the research teams are multinational too. Everything is seen as a threat to defense. So every discipline has a place in the military-industrial complex. That includes religious studies, because the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, also known as DARPA, found that religious people were prone to object to warfare that employed robots and cyborgs, which are creatures with electronic implantation. So ways to counter this prejudice have to be researched, and they're contracted with professors of religious studies to see how this problem could be dealt with. So it isn't just the physical scientists. There are social scientists of every kind. There is a Minerva project, a Minerva initiative of the Department of Defense that specifically is for social scientists. And in January, the Defense Department funded a $90 million research center at Howard University, which had been a major part of the civil rights movement. And the research is for the US Air Force to develop tactical autonomy warfare. And that is the use of autonomous agents in warfare. Howard University. Defense Department itself has its own philanthropy. It donates surplus equipment to the Red Cross, to the Girl Scouts and others. It also just disposes of its surplus to state governments. One example is the armored Bearcat, which is now owned by the police in my city. And I will show you a picture of the Bearcat. Yes, and many cities have this armored vehicle, along with all kinds of other surplus property of the Department of Defense at bargain prices. On the other hand, the private contractors, especially the weapons makers, are very philanthropic. They're particularly generous when it comes to minority and youth organizations, such as the Congressional Black Caucus, the American Indian organizations, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. They are major donors to all the arts and also supporters of women's organizations. And the contractors don't just give cash grants. They fund joint programs, scholarships, and internships. They send tutors and mentors to public schools. They sponsor STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education programs, including the very popular robotics competitions in public schools. And the employees attend wearing T-shirts with the company logos on them, and the children notice these and remember. I'll show you a robotics. There. See how happy they are, how much fun they are having, and how much they're learning. But these are sponsored by the military companies, and it's part of their long-term recruitment process, and it works. But if you have a child, especially a minority child or disabled child who is in these programs and is finally smiling, you're not going to turn around and talk about the problems of the US military operations or the defense contractors, because you are going to self-censor, regardless of what you think of the military. Non-governmental organizations, including churches and have investments in funds that have lucrative military industries in their portfolio. And this is also true of state and local government and union pension funds. Of course, it's also the case of private corporate funds, but we wouldn't expect those people to protest that much. But the fact that union funds and state and local government funds have those is a problem. Some of the people who benefit from the grants, does happen sometimes that people who benefit from the grants or investments do protest, but it's very rare. However, it's useful because it breaks the silence. One such protest occurred at the School of Social Service at the University of Chicago. It was changing its name to the Crown Family School of Social Work because of a $75 million donation from the chairman of General Dynamics, which is a major military contractor in Chicago, also very supportive of the rise to political power of Obama. Divestment projects actually create awareness. Many people don't know what's in their pension portfolios. In December 2021, the New York City Council voted to divest city funds from nuclear weapons makers. The pension funds were just merely requested to do so. But I don't know whether anything has happened. I wasn't able to find out. It would have required too much research and too much time at the computer to find out if changes have actually been made. But it at least brought some visibility to the situation. States have military departments and National Guard units. State economic departments try to attract military companies to locate, often with huge subsidies. The state environmental departments work with the enormous remediation projects. Economic development commissions are very interested in getting money from the defense budget. Hanford, Washington, which is considered the most contaminated area in the United States, has a endless billion-dollar cleanup controlled by the Department of Energy. It may never be cleaned up, but meanwhile, there are jobs. Hanford is a shining rock of prosperity for its area, a shining rock. And even recreation is part of the complex. I'll just show you a picture of Hanford. Yeah, that's Hanford cleanup going on forever. The Army Corps of Engineers has for a long time been creating parks and lakes for civilians. The parks are maintained with help from contractors, and we may like to swim there, but it could dampen our thoughts about the military. Military bases offer hunting, fishing, kayaking, camping, and bouncy castles. Some of these are for military personnel only, but others are for anyone with the appropriate sponsorship, such as membership in the NRA. An unusual tourist experience is the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. It covers 3 sites: Hanford, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The visitors can see where nuclear weapons were developed. Children may receive junior ranger badges after their visit. I'll show you the park. This is a tourist attraction. Manhattan Project National Historical Park. Do you want to go? So in conclusion, I want to say that the military actually does some useful things. I don't deny that, but at the cost of silencing millions. The useful things could be done by civilian agencies. Another controversial proposal is for a civilian national service requirement for everybody. It could provide human power for necessary work, make jobs for immigrants and others, could employ scientists, engineers, teachers, and artists in humane work and benefit from the wisdom of farmers, craftspeople, and indigenous people. It might also help to unify our fractious country by creating a culture of diversity, tolerance, and cooperation. Philosopher William James called for a moral equivalent of war by means of civilian service. This idea, I think, is worthy of exploration. I don't know how it would come about, but I'm just suggesting one thing that people could perhaps think about, and that's all I'm going to say, and I'd be happy to have questions.
I have a question, Joan.
Yes.
It's about something that you actually spoke about at the very beginning of your talk, which is the danger of war with all this military buildup and budget.
I want to comment that Bill Hartung points out that our great Defense Department has not won a war since World War II. It lost the wars in Latin America, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Yugoslavia, Vietnam, of course, everywhere else. And when Lyndon Johnson was president, one of his generals came to him and said, "We're never going to win this war in Vietnam. It's just impossible. Why do you keep pushing it?" And he said, "Because all my friends are making so much money." So.
Okay.
So we have questions, I'm sure.
Emil started to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, if it's all right, I'll continue with my question. It's something that Joan spoke about at the very beginning of her talk, which is the danger of war, and in particular, danger of nuclear war. And I wonder would you please address the question of, I am particularly concerned in this current period of the danger of a war between the United States and China.
Well,
yeah.
I can't really say more than what has been said by the other commentators on this. I certainly am not unhappy that we haven't won wars. I'm glad that we haven't won wars. I mean, in Vietnam, for example, we practically destroyed the country, but perhaps we didn't win the war. It survived somewhat. We have practically destroyed many other countries, worse in Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan, more devastating. But I certainly feel that it's absolutely ridiculous to think of a war with China for every kind of reason, for moral reasons, for economic reasons. China owns an awful lot of corporations in the United States. A lot of corporations have sources in China. I mean, there's so much economic between the two, and there's no, China is not threatening the United States in any way whatsoever. There's no reason to destroy the world because of a war with China. It's like small children in kindergarten who want to beat up somebody. There's no reason for it. It is so absurd. There's absolutely no threat. The only threat is that Chinese have recently come out with some documents saying they want a world of peaceful coexistence. And that's what the United States feels is a threat. That's really what they say. This is China is threatening a world of peaceful coexistence, which is, I think, what the Chinese want. have read a lot of my friend Jeff Brown's reports from China. And it certainly makes sense to me, as well, of course, as what I knew about China from you years ago. There's just no reason. It's just so irrational. There's no, even, of course, the threat of the Soviet Union was not real in 1945. There was a threat of socialism in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, the national liberation movements, yes, and maybe a little bit in the United States, but the Soviet Union was not planning to invade Western Europe at that point. It's quite irrational, and it's scary, but I don't know. It's a very big issue. I wish more people would think about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Joan. We have another question from someone in our audience right here in San Miguel.
Oh, good. Really.
If you would speak to the my computer, it will.
Okay,
you'll
now
be
I
able-
see myself. Can you see me? Thank you so much,
Yes.
Joan. A very informative and disturbing conversation. I would just like to speak to your point about war with China. As Khrushchev had said decades ago, there will be no war. We will penetrate you and take over from within, and you won't even know it. China has spent billions of dollars donating funds to Ivy League colleges. They're buying up too much property to count, military bases in the US. They own harbors. I mean, it goes on and on. So there won't be a war. It just seems that they're quietly taking over. So I would just like to hear your opinion on that.
That's a little off my topic, but I will say that it isn't just the Chinese. The Middle Eastern countries also own a lot of the United States, including harbors and things like that. The Arab countries of the wealthy Arab countries of the Gulf also own a lot. And French companies, Dutch companies, our supermarkets are owned by foreign corporations. There's a tremendous amount of that. And the United States also owns corporations in many other places. Insofar as it's a problem, I don't think the solution is nuclear war.
No, I don't think
There has to be a better way.
No, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that it's.
She's talking about doing this without war.
There's no war. I'm saying it's the deed's already done. There's no need to look at war. I've been in a number of University of California
Yeah.
institutions in recent years. You think you're in Beijing, and even friends of mine who are
Sure.
instructors, professors
Sure.
there have said the same thing.
And
So
in
something.
Pardon?
Pardon?
Where I live in New England, northern.
Yeah,
New England.
they're mostly not Asians, they're mostly Chinese.
Yes.
CCT students at the University of California, up and down the coast. I've been
Of
there,
course.
I saw it, I'm just bringing that up. There's not gonna be any war. The war is very quiet and it's happening. So
Well-
it's, I don't see French people there. I don't see many Middle Eastern.
No.
It's full of Chinese. So
Well,
time for us all to learn Mandarin, I guess. But you haven't addressed that, so that's.
Well, I would say in general, immigrants in this country, whether they're poor immigrants or educated immigrants or rich immigrants, are not people who protest US foreign policy for all sorts of reasons. Certainly undocumented immigrants don't protest. But people here who are foreign students or professors, I don't see a lot of protests from immigrants. Maybe a few do, but it isn't. They're here for whatever reason, and they don't quibble much about things like U.S. foreign policy. And as far as the healthcare system is concerned in northern New England, where I live, the new doctors are people from the Middle East or Pakistan, or I even had a doctor from Somalia, at the Dartmouth Center. Yes, because we don't have enough people in the United States who do those jobs. We use them. We use the immigrants for healthcare, for janitorial work, for farm labor, as well as scientists, scientists and engineers.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
There are so many things to comment upon. And I think one of the most important things to say is that the Defense Department takes up almost a half, 50% of the US budget every year. And so much of it is not necessary. And think of what the US government could do with all that money
Yes.
instead of spending it on all of the
Oh,
things
yes.
that it does spend it on. We're in a climate catastrophe. You've seen the recent IPCC report that came out last week. If we don't do something immediately, there's going to be climate chaos that is going to be worse and worse. Meanwhile, the US government is giving licenses for more drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska. The last thing we need is more gas. But of course, you can't have a war unless you have gas. And for countries that are thinking about possibly joining the BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and are moving to de-dollarize their economy, the US military is a huge threat to these countries. And if the world de-dollarizes, the US might have to actually pay its debt. So it's very complicated, and it's a very complicated
Yes.
structure as how all of this is built up and maintained.
Yeah, I would like to comment on. Can I-
Joan, you have
I'd like to comment on that. First of all, yes, the cost of one new aircraft carrier, which we don't need, and the last one hasn't been put into operation yet. I can't figure it out. That would house all the homeless in the country. I mean, the waste is incredible, but the groups like the National Priorities Project have written a lot about that, and Hartung. I just don't focus on that, but of course it's the case. And I also feel that they're printing money to pay for things like the remediation at Hanford. And that's just one place. There's so much money spent on the superconductors, on so many things. And there's an economic threat as well as a physical threat to this country, certainly, from the budget. Yes, sorry, now, Norma.
question? Okay, Bob has a question.
Oh, I think didn't Norma have a question?
Come and speak into the.
I actually forgot it.
Oh, I'm
It'll come up again. I won't be far.
This was wonderful. Bringing out the expansion of military Keynesianism beyond the arms industry itself, and making sure that military Keynesianism is permeating every nook and cranny of our economy and making us more and more dependent on the military industrial. And then I would add congressional and
NGO, media.
media complex. You gotta have so you've expanded our vision of that. Thank you very much, Joan. But I wanted to ask if there's another psychological element in answering the question, why no peace movement? I remember saber rattling of the kind that is going on now by Putin and Biden drew 1 million people into Central Park in 1982 for the freeze movement. And then talking up the invasion of Iraq by Tony Blair and Bush was answered by the biggest and the biggest anti-war demonstration. 40 million people in the capitals of the world. But it was, in a way, a defeat, because all Bush had to do was wait until the February 15th deadline for the demonstrations around the world, Johannesburg, Mexico, Rome, the biggest demonstrations ever in Rome and London, Tokyo, all over. He waited, the day passed, and then he invaded. So protest is, I'm wondering if there's something deeper in our psyches. And I want to ask you if you've read Tom Englehart's account of being terrorized by the civil defense movement, self-imposition of care of your own life to yourself if you build a bomb shelter in your backyard. Think of how that trauma, and this is what Tom brings out, effects on generations of young Americans.
You are now old.
Better dead than red. Think of what better dead than red means. It means we will be made red if we have and lose a nuclear war with the Russians. Wait a minute. How about our freedom? We don't have to agree with communism. We don't have to agree with the Russians. It makes us into robots. That premise, better dead than red. But that ran our foreign policy. It spread the defense budget into all of the states. Give the military stimulus to all of the states. Then even if their representatives are liberals, anti-war liberals, they will vote for the defense budget as a jobs program.
Yes.
And there's no other way to do it. We had a congressman in my district of Connecticut who wanted conversion, but he voted for the arms budget because we had electric boat next to the submarines. So I'm just wondering, there's been some kind of defeatism, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on the psychological inhibition in the people of the United States against stopping.
I actually
stop certainly by what you pointed to.
I did say in my book, I've emphasized this, that there are other reasons for the silence, and it includes fear, it includes propaganda, And it also includes distractions that people have. And some of these are trivial distractions, but some of the distractions are family problems, health problems, and even a lot of the volunteer service people do in their communities, serving breakfast to the homeless and all of that. And those are good things people do, but it also distracts them from working in an anti-war protest movement. So that I did say that, but I said my book is going to be about the interests specifically that have dampened anti-war and have created silence. So I don't deny that these are extremely important aspects, but again, it's a division of labor. I didn't talk that much about it, but you're certainly right that fear is a big problem. But also the fear of being disapproved of by one's community, by one's neighbors, by one organization that you belong to. Fear of criticizing the investments of a church, for example, that claims to be for humankind and all of that, and still invests in military stocks. You don't want to rock the boat because you know the church needs money wherever it can get it, and people don't want you to be a spoil sport about that. There's a lot of fear. Saying something wrong when somebody has lost somebody in the wars. Fear is important in all sorts of ways. But I think the fear of communism, say in 1945, was much more a fear amongst capitalists than it was amongst ordinary people.
Well, they're the ones who own the press.
And yes, that also.
Cost of War project, I think it's at Brown University, estimates that military spending creates about 11,200 jobs per $1 billion spent. Now, I wonder how many teachers and nurses you could hire for $1 billion. But you have a question, so please come up here.
Oh, can I ask
speak
mine?
Into the
Can I ask mine?
Thank you. In support of what you were saying about the slowness or non-existence of protests, I think it's well taken. Protests, I think, can have a very positive effect. I think we've seen that recently in Israel as they try to reform, as Netanyahu wants to reform the judicial agencies, keep himself in power, and that was met with outrage and protest where he had to back off, at least for now. Also, I think, we saw that protests had a positive effect in the 1960s. On the other hand, this young woman's point about it might be somewhat short-sighted if we don't pay attention to outside influences that are affecting our society as well, not just our own military. That's all you gotta say.
What about the current police brutality and the demonstrations?
Yeah.
It seems so
I think Norma had her hand
of
up.
the police in the United States is a whole nother
Try.
topic. And the cop city that they're building in Atlanta, Georgia, is sort of a trial to see how will this go down with the average American. And if there's not a lot of opposition, there'll probably be cop cities all over the United States. So
A close relative. of mine.
militarization of the United States.
Absolutely.
Do you have something to say to that, Joan?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. A militarization of police forces and everything else is certainly part of this distribution of the military. But Norma has had her hand up, and I think we should ask.
Okay,
her.
Norma.
Hello. Did you get my notice of conciliation about Jeff's death? I certainly extend my condolences. The comment about how the coming deluge or horror global breakage by our owners, it's not coming, it's here. Over half the world is on the march, looking for a way not to drown and looking for a way to access, to get to the earth, to be able to survive. Over half the world, it's already more than here. So people can no longer say it's coming. That was my original comment. Now my comment is that I have posted for your delectation, everybody. You know, Putin has been represented as being a fool, insane, all kinds of things, which of course is what the US does, is how the US runs its programs of attack on anybody, on everybody, on the way to murder, assassinate people that they decide are causing problems in the world. Well, they've certainly created that about Putin, who happens to be one of the better informed people in the world, along with the rest of the scholarly people out of Russia. And now Russia has organized a presentation at the UN, and I put the link up because I think it's required reading for us to know that there is this whole other side of the event that we're wondering about, that we are in an altogether different position from what we keep thinking we are, and we're propagandized to think we are. And in fact, the world is communism is creeping throughout the world, regardless of the fight back against it, because people don't want to live. They've discovered they don't have to live under the colonialization that has been going on and insulting them and hurting them so badly. So people everywhere are in struggle for control of the land under their feet and under their neighbors' feet. So on.
Yeah, just for survival. And I want to point out that Mexico is making an application to join the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And they will probably be developing, along with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is China and Russia, they are building another SWIFT system, which is a payments system. So whenever you use your credit card, it goes through SWIFT, which of course goes through New York and the US dollar and maintains the value of the US dollar. But other countries are experimenting with de-dollarizing, and that is a huge threat to the United States.
Yes.
And I'd like to know what Joan has to say about the Defense Department defending essentially not the United States. No one's going to attack the United States, but the US dollar as world reserve currency.
Yes, I wish the Defense Department would defend the children in our schools and the people in our institutions that are being gunned down all the time. I wish they'd figure out how to really defend the health of the people and the lives of people in this country. Of course, that's a whole nother story. Why? I didn't go into the question of why it's all happening, but I have to say that it is a positive thing, the BRICS and the role that China has now taken, which it hadn't taken before, to step out as the proponent of peaceful coexistence. And I actually read all the 3 documents that China issued recently. I printed them out and read them. And it makes so much sense, but it isn't something that the press will even talk about. They'll just say, China's threatening the United States with peaceful coexistence, that kind of thing. But of course, there are, what disappoints me terribly, because I have wonderful connections in Finland. I spent time there as a guest of the university. I'm terribly disappointed in Finland joining NATO. It just bothers me personally as well as politically. But so Western Europe has to be moved somehow. There are plenty of people in Western Europe who want to live peacefully and not have to import natural gas from the United States at 3 times the cost. But I don't know how to move that.
Well, you might not have to. The Russian effort that is being presented in the UN might be doing it for us.
Yeah, there definitely is progress, and also throughout Latin America, there's some quite a bit of progress in standing. And Mexico, I'm proud of Mexico too, and their stance on many issues as a nation.
Yes, we are as well.
Yeah. So there are definitely positive things. So maybe it's happening too slowly for me at my age.
One of the other things I posted in the chat, which is not really available until later, but is that with all this unification under one body, the Defense Department that you've been describing, John, with all that unification, we just have to get our governance to say it all belongs to the people. Have the dictatorship of the proletariat over all our stuff.
Well, I think there's much more possibility of influencing state and local government. There is a possibility, but a lot of them are so tied into the military. The governor of my state is going to speak at the NRA convention right now after the horrible militarization, gun deaths. New Hampshire is a very militarized state. So is Washington state, and Columbia, California, Georgia. Tremendous. North Carolina brags about how it's the most militarized state in the nation.
Yeah, but it's the leaders that it's not in contact with the people. And I think if we have the impression in our heads of the lemmings, little by little, more by more,
Maybe
that
we have to. Yes, I hope people will figure out. That's my whole point. How to change it, and I don't know. I don't know whether demonstrations or petitions are that helpful. Maybe there are other ways. We have to get people to realize these are important issues, and maybe we can figure out how to do something about it. I'm not in total despair. I just know that I myself can't figure it out all alone. and I shouldn't have to, more people should be involved in this rather than in so many other things that they're involved with. A lot of good brains are being used for very trivial things. And a lot of people are very bored and unhappy with their work, even if they're paid well, because it's for inhumane or trivial causes, or environmentally damaging stuff that doesn't make anyone happy, particularly. There isn't important for human needs, but it's waste things just to make jobs,
That's
So
what I'm saying. People don't like their jobs. They hate school for a long time. Did you ever read Peanuts? Peanuts cartoon where he walks up and kicks the school frequently.
Yeah.
The Defense Department was one of the first organizations to focus on climate change as a problem. One sector of the economy. The other was the insurance industry.
Yeah.
And the Defense Department, sea level rise, what is that going to do to all of the Navy bases around the world?
Okay.
They're thinking about that. And so they know exactly what is happening with the climate crisis, but they might be remediating, a little bit here, a little bit there, but they're not doing anything seriously to remediate the climate crisis. We have a question from someone else in our audience.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Joan.
Hi.
This has been fascinating. I would like to take us to a global level more than we've gone, to ask your opinion on how independently is the government at the federal level and at many state levels really acting independently, because they are following the United Nations agenda 2021, 2030, and 2040, and the agenda of the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
So I am really curious to know how much independence does our federal government and state governments really have? We're assuming they have it, and I'm not sure about that.
Well, I would put it the other way around, that the UN, the World Economic Forum, are very much influenced by the corporations of the United States. The UN has been quite a bit corrupted. And we could see this amazingly. I watched the talks that were given about the Nord Stream explosions by Jeffrey Sachs and Ray McGovern. Gave a talk before the Security Council, suggesting that the Security Council investigate the Nord Stream pipeline implosion. And then I watched all the delegates, and only the Chinese and the Russian thought it might be a good idea for the Security Council to investigate. The UN has been terribly disappointing, although it's done a good job in small things, weather predictions and, some commercial areas, even a little helps, some human rights issues. That it's done some work, but in its major purpose to prevent war, it's been a terrible failure, and it's so obviously in control of certain Western powers. The United States has a lot of control over Western Europe that's unprecedented, thinking that these were social democracies at one time. I have some idea of how it has happened. There's much more to be investigated, and maybe if I live long enough, I will. It's mostly a problem of sitting too much at the computer to figure this, get this information. So much information is available now, even if you don't know all the languages.
We've had a person involved very closely with UN here in the San Francisco area, and she has reminded us that people get together in the hallways at the UN.
Yes. That's been very important, especially because there are so many tiny countries that could never afford to have embassies in major countries. They couldn't afford that, but they have somebody at the UN who can talk to all of the other representatives. So they don't have to have, they have to have only one embassy in New York City, and they have contacts with all that, and that's been very important. So there are a lot of small things. In fact, a lot of countries in the rest of the world actually believe in international law and observe it most of the time, except for a few countries that don't. And there's just a lot going on that the mainstream press in the United States never shows. But I know about the demonstrations against NATO in Europe, for example, because I follow it. But most people are completely unaware.
Little by little, that'll come together.
Well, I hope so. I hope I hope we can end on a happy note. I don't know, Betsy, how long you want to go on for?
Well, we're getting about to the end of our normal time. It's more a question of how long are you willing?
I can
to
stay. I could stay for longer. I could
the
stay till.
damage that the US is doing to our relations with European countries by blowing up Nord Stream 1 and 2 is just appalling. The Europeans, especially the Germans, are up in arms about that, but of course you don't hear anything
Well,
about that. Of course,
yeah.
the US wants to separate Germany from Russia. It doesn't like the
Yeah.
closeness of Germany and Russia because Germany's importing so much Russian oil and natural gas. But the
Germany remembers its
economic impacts and implications and ramifications of all of this is astonishing. And we thank you so much, Joan, for your talk today. And I hope everybody here and everybody who sees this video, because it's on our webpage, you can watch it again. You're going to tell your friends to watch it later on. I hope everyone buys Joan's book and learns from it and shares it with other people.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that Joan is a professor emerita from Keene State College in New Hampshire. And we're very, very fortunate to have her with us today. And once again, I want to thank you, Joan.
I want to thank you for
so
having
much.
me because I remember all the great times in San Miguel and how inspiring it all was. I'm just too old to go back, but
No, you are.
I have it in my mind all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you again, Joan.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna end it. We're gonna